My presentation this afternoon is really my way of giving back to the current refugees what they have shared with me, their stories, their experiences, and the opportunity that they have been giving me for several years, since 2003 until present, to be part of their community. And they have, in fact, commissioned me several times to be their spokesperson, because these current people, and many of them are situated on the border between Burma and Thailand, they consider themselves as forgotten people. And they have been in several refugee camps for more than 40 years now, that many of their children who were born there even consider the camp as their homeland. And so this also becomes a struggle, a dilemma for the parents on how to inculcate a sense of interest in their children to listen and learn more about the stories of their parents. And so narratives, lived stories of current refugees, reveal psychosocial trauma. This is more of exploratory in nature. And this is a byproduct of my years of work and practice. And this presentation will also share with us what healing means for the current refugees. I'm very much into the contextualization of trauma and healing. Because based on my years of practice, every community that I work with really has a different way or ways of conceptualizing and articulating what trauma means to them, how they were impacted and affected by a particular event. And the same thing with healing as well. What healing means for me may be different from what healing means to you. What healing means for my family may be different to what healing means to your family. Just because it works in my context doesn't necessarily mean it will work in your context. We may experience the same kind of traumatic event, but the way we assign meanings and interpretations to that experience vary. And that is very important to take into consideration, because whether we like it or not, that will also shape and inform the way we address it when it comes to healing mechanisms. Okay. Oops. Who do we get it? Oh, there you go. Okay. So, current refugees, they are one of the largest ethnic minorities. Oh, sorry. I don't know. Okay. Which one shall I press here? This one, right? Okay. So, current refugees, current people, they're one of the biggest ethnic minorities, in Burma or Myanmar, and because of the ongoing military junta, okay, the practitioner in me really wants to just go around this place. And because of the ongoing military junta, of course, it is now changing, but still, there are still a lot of skirmishes happening in the countryside. Several ethnic minorities have been displaced and uprooted from their home community. Oops. Okay. Storytelling does not have boundaries. As long as you're ready, it doesn't matter how others may respond to your stories. The bottom line is you're able to tell it the way you want to tell it. And there's got to be something in storytelling that even current refugees, really want to do. And many find storytelling, as healing, and it has lots of benefits as well. So this is just one of the work communities that I work in different, in one of the refugee camps. And at one point, I gave myself the opportunity to live in several refugee camps for more than a year, just to have that feel of what life is like, inside a refugee camp. But of course, I knew that by the end of the day, I could always get out of that place wherever I wanted, But at least just to be part of them, to live with them, is something that makes my understanding of trauma, the resilience, and what recovery and healing also mean to them even more impactful. So in this study, the current refugees gave voice to their experience of trauma and their vision of healing. They were the authors, they were the narrators, of their experience, instead of me as an outsider putting words into their mouth or defining what trauma means to them. And I like that because I noticed that the process of assigning meanings and being the authors and narrators of the experience is itself affirming and validating and empowering. So based on my practice, I was not just after for the result, for the output. I was also very much concerned about the process. I want the process to also make sense to them. And one way of doing that is being able to narrate it the way they wanted it, for those who were ready. And then the context that gave rise to the traumatic events is crucial in understanding people's experience of trauma. And then healing mechanisms are holistic, highlighting individual and societal resilience. So, how do we describe displacement stories? And these are what I have noticed and what they have told me as well. Sad stories, heartful stories, scary stories, stories about destruction of people's properties and means of livelihood, unforgettable stories, stories of hate, pitiful stories. This might be new, this might not be new, but the fact that these are coming through their mouths, I think is something that has to be taken into consideration. So how do current refugees really kind of articulate or conceptualize what trauma means to them? Because trauma is foreign to many countries around the world. The problem is we just tend to impose this term onto people who might have actually a different way of looking at it and then assigning labels to this. So for the current refugees, of course, in their language, with the help of several documenters and translators, for them, what we call trauma is tatubakaba, which means suffering. Tatubakaba, or the scar of suffering. Actually, that is El Camilo over there. So, scar of suffering, which embodies, an interdisciplinary approach to the impact of war or displacement. And then healing for current refugees means tama blagay. And so trauma healing for them is tama blagay tatubakaba. That's actually Er Camilo, For them to be able to really struggle with it, I don't mind having them, them spending like several hours, but just to come up with something that's reflective of who they are and what they have gone through, I think has a different kind of benefit for them in the long run. So, kinds of traumatization that current refugees face, not really new to us, but just a reminder for us. Many of them really experience shared trauma, which could best explain, particularly within the context of a collectivist society or collectivist culture. No, shared trauma is further reinforced by the theory of group identity. And what I notice as well is that shared trauma actually helps deflect the intensity and the degree of pain and suffering, because they are there as a community. The trauma of one is actually shared by the entire community, by the entire family. And for them to be aware of it is beneficial in the long run. And then multiple traumas as well, just to name it. Sometimes we don't know, this is what they say, where to start the grieving process and which trauma to address first, because there are just too many. I also learned from current refugees that the trauma which resulted from war or armed conflict is different from the trauma that was brought about by displacement, which is different from the trauma that resulted from loss of loved ones who were killed, which was different from the destruction of their houses and properties. And I think we need to really also identify this, because each of these trauma is unique and also calls for a differing approach to healing and mechanism. In other words, I noticed and I learned that there's no blanket approach to healing and recovery. That's why I think to name that, yes, we have experienced multiple trauma, but which of these traumas really call for an immediate attention and response, I think that is part of our undertaking, and that is part of our challenge. And then repetitive traumas. Many current refugees have been displaced not just once or twice, but 3 times, 4 times. Before they even arrive at the first refugee camp, several of them, tens and thousands of them, have been internally displaced for many months and years. And I remember part of my work in one of the displaced communities in Southeast Asia, they even said, we are IDPs who have returned home, even though they are no longer IDPs technically, but it's already become ingrained and embedded in their psyche. Yes, we are IDPs who have returned home. And sometimes I would insist, no, you are no longer IDPs, but they still see themselves as such. And so how can we reach this level towards recovery when how they perceive themselves is still very much self-defeating? And then the possibility of the intergenerational transmission of trauma, displaced anger, displaced frustrations, displaced disappointments, displaced way of addressing the shattered dreams of the young people. There's also a growing rate of domestic violence in many refugee camps because husbands or fathers who use and who see themselves as the breadwinners now felt like they have been demoted to their children. Now they become dependent on their ration to survive. And they don't know how to process this. And so it resulted to domestic abuse and domestic violence. And so if these are how Karen refugees kind of articulate and conceptualize trauma, what does healing mean for them? Healing for them really connotes social, economic, and political implications, not just mental health. Because they said that their displacement resulted to destruction of cultural formations. It resulted to destruction of social relationships. And so I think this is part of what we call social healing. They use terms such as rebuilding, reconstruction, the absence of war, and transforming the negative impact of conflict into something beneficial. And if translated into concrete terms, because I really conducted several of these conversations, they would say healing for us, of course in their language, means having food on our table. Healing means being able to sleep at night without fear of being hit by flying bullets. Healing for us means being able to be reunited with our loved ones who we don't know whether they are still alive or not. And who am I? Sometimes I was kind of tempted to say, no, that's not healing, that's part of development. But for them, that's healing. So who am I to tell them, no, that's not healing? And so what I did is really just to expand my consciousness and understanding about healing. Healing is indeed very encompassing and holistic. So this is part of the result, this is just one of the trainings and workshops that I facilitated, just to bring out into the open, what healing means for them and how to go about that kind of healing. And this whole experience actually affirmed or validates my philosophy in the field of psychosocial trauma healing, which suggests that no matter how victimized communities or traumatized communities, families, even individuals may feel about themselves, if given the proper tools and the opportunity, they actually remain active participants in their own healing and rebuilding. I don't believe in passive victimization. They may be passive during the first few weeks because they are still in shock, they are still in disbelief, but they are passive perhaps because that's how we treat them. But if given the proper tools, months after the incident, for example, they actually are capable of making sense, of articulating, their war and displacement experience. So these new emerging concepts and expressions of healing, according to current refugees, imply that collective and individual healing is not only medical or clinical. So I think this is really a way of expanding further, not to undermine the clinical aspect of it, because trauma also impacts the mental well-being of many current refugees that I've worked with, but rather just to look at it from a much bigger perspective. No? It also embraces peace-building mechanisms and conflict transformation processes. And so this is the mechanisms, healing for them. It has relief assistance, humanitarian services, that's part of the healing component, economic and political stability, the forging of peace agreements, that is also the political component of healing, lobbying, advocacy, psychosocial programs, education and trainings. And for these to come from the current refugees themselves is really something. Okay, and this is the last slide that I have. So a contextualized, elicitive approach to understanding trauma healing empowers indigenous communities, like the current refugees. It affirms and validates them of the resilience and collective strength. It enables them to become partners or allies in peace building, particularly in healing recovery work, instead of making them become passive beneficiaries of outside charity, resulting to dependency in the long run. And then it restores communities of their place in history and their sense of human dignity. And then it is restorative in nature in various facets of community living. Thank you so much.